Okay, let's review our agenda. We're going to go over last meeting's action items, and actually we might skip that this session because I think all of them align tightly to what we're talking about. I'm going to give an update on where we are on freezing the spec and the release schedule for this upcoming release. We're going to talk about the kind of final steps for custom scaler specification, deprecation of input fields, full Unicode support, backwards compatible introspection, defer and stream, and if Orta is able to show up, then we can talk about the GraphQL.org website redesign goals. Anything not covered in this agenda that folks want to talk about today?
Like small news about Summer of Code. So GraphQL Foundation applying this Google Summer of Code host. So if anybody have idea for what students can do in 3 months, they can submit issue on Foundation repo. I will send link to the chat.
Very good point. We'll try to make some more noise about that happening soon. But I'm excited about that. If anybody wants Summer of Code interns to help out with projects, let me or Yvonne know. Okay, let's dive in. I have the first two agenda items. First, usually we review the previous meeting's action items. Actually took a moment to do that before the meeting started and realized that every single action item lined up with one of the things on the agenda today. So sort of in the spirit of staying focused and keeping on time, I'm gonna skip over that step and let us sort of just focus on the agenda of the day. In terms of the spec freeze and the release schedule, I'm going to propose that the end of today is the freeze for the spec, which if everyone's cool with that, means the release schedule is going to look like the following. Over the remainder of this month, I, at least personally, and I hope anybody else here who's interested in doing so, should comb through the spec and look for any irregularities, any issues, bugs, spelling mistakes, anything like that. I think there's already been a handful of things like that caught in the last couple of weeks, which is awesome. We should kind of find and fix as many of those as possible. Meanwhile, Brian, our program manager, is going to be making sure that everyone who's contributed over the last year and a half has up-to-date legal documents so that we can make sure that what we're offering is bulletproof and actually backed by all of the legal guarantees that we've been promising with the foundation. And then I'll be writing up sort of elongated release notes that go not just to all the various RFCs that have landed, but sort of paint a picture of how this release is different from the ones that we've done in the past, and how the sort of the reinvigoration of this working group is the root cause of that. Any questions about the release schedule or the spec freeze?
I have a small question. Is it possible that we have something like a tag to tag all the things that went into the GraphQL spec? Or if not, if we can't do that for all the merge stuff now, it would be cool if we had like a milestone or something for the next spec. Because I mean, I'm also reading through the spec like multiple times a month, but it would be far easier to get an overview what really changed for the main.
That's a really good suggestion. It's making me think that we probably want to frame up the release notes in a couple different forms. So I was thinking first to just have like a bulleted list of literally everything that's changed, basically a human readable version of the commit log, in addition to sort of like a high level explainer. But I like your idea of using a tag. I think especially since the vast majority of commits that landed came from PRs that spent a long time, and most of which went through the full RFC process. You can just tag all of those with GraphQL 2020 if they landed. I'm open to suggestions about how we want to do that for next year's spec release. If we want to do a milestone, I think that could be a pretty reasonable way to do that. I think the tricky part is that we don't always know which RFCs are going to land in a particular release. Some of these RFCs that landed in this year's release had been worked on for 2 or 3 years. So sometimes these things, kind of stew for a long time before they finally crisp up into the form that we want them to be in. But if there's other forms that you want to see from release notes, then certainly let me know, because I think that's like my primary deliverable for this whole process is not necessarily just the spec, but like how people can understand what has changed in the last year and a half.
On this note, like last time we released a spec, Lee, you asked people to write articles about that and promised to reference them in the release notes, but nobody actually did that. So maybe if somebody actually want to work on this article, you can start now after feature freeze, because nothing new is adding. And I think it would be great to reference article. And this time we'll have more time to work on article if somebody wants content for a blog.
That's a great suggestion. I think especially if you worked on something that was merged into this release, one of the major RFCs, there's a lot of ripe ground there to talk about, not just the change and how it's important, but kind of the process that you went through. Yvonne makes a good point. I think I didn't mention, but an important part is a press plan. So my hope is to have all this stuff sort of developed in the open. So probably in the GraphQL spec repo, we'll just track all the stuff in the context of an issue. A lot of the stuff ends up being developed through Google Docs just because it's easier to collaborate with less technical folks working on press. But we'll have a full press plan of like all the various things that we're going to release. And I'll incorporate anybody who wants to be part of that process. More than happy to include you. If you want to write a blog post, I'm happy to help in whatever way I can help. If that's editing, or if you just want me to read stuff before it goes out, happy to do that too. Is anyone actively interested in doing that?
Yeah, it could be that I will write 1 or 2 blog posts. I have one at least already about the interface hierarchies, which you could reference if you want to.
Awesome. I know Mike also has one about the interfaces.
Yeah, I wanted to say that Mike has also written a good one.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't miss that one. He would put a lot of energy into that.
I would be interested what you mean exactly with freeze after today. Does it mean that we want to include like the custom scaler, and I see like another one is like disallow non-breaking chains, and that's it? Or what was your intention?
Good question. I think disallow non-breaking change is in approved state or accepted state. I'm going to merge that one today after I kind of review it a final time. That one's based on the fact that the reference implementation's basically been ready for months, if not close to a year, actually. The last round of feedback that one got was a year ago. I think custom scalars, considering that it's on our agenda today, is not quite ready yet, which is fine. I mean, like the spec is really just like a moment to kind of snapshot what we have in time. Missing that cut is not a big deal, right? It just means that, because like all reference implementation, all of the implementations track the draft more so than they track a specific edition of the spec. So I think the custom scalars, since we're still working on it and it's not released as part of the spec and there's still some open questions, will not make the cut, but disallow breaking change will. Anybody have strong feelings about this or objections?
One clarification: it doesn't block stuff being merged into GraphQL.js, right? Everything that hit like H2 can be matched.
GraphQL.js. Yeah,
Yeah,
GraphQL.js should keep on trucking. Basically, what the freeze means from a tactical point of view is pull requests to the GraphQL spec repo outside of the RFC folder are not going to be merged for a couple weeks. We could do something with branches, but it's just a lot of work. It's just much easier if there's like a single timeline of work happening. So for the next couple of weeks, we're just going to focus on minor editorial fixes if we can find them, and getting it to a spot where we can kind of nail down that cut. So I think the only thing that might affect is custom scalars. If custom scalars gets to an accepted state, then we just might wait a couple of weeks before we merge it in, just to kind of keep those things from stomping on each other's feet. But all other projects should keep on merging code. Cool. Any other questions about spec cut? All right, let's move on. I'll hand it over to Matt.
Great, awesome, thanks. So there hasn't been a lot of updates in the last month. Basically, we're waiting for GraphQL.js 15 to be cut. And then as soon as that's done, we'll rebase this work off of that, and then we'll release this in 15.1.0. So it's kind of just on hold because of that. The only open, and the code has been stable, there hasn't been any changes there. The only question I had was a follow-up to like what we talked about at the end of last month's meeting. I incorrectly said something about how if you added 2 specified directives at once, that was like allowed, and it's not allowed because you should only be able to have a specified directive there once. But if you extend it multiple times, then it is present multiple times in the type extension map. And so my implementation is just taking the last entry there, which I think is the right thing to do, but wasn't exactly sure in how this impacts like other directives that may expect to only be there once, but if you use extensions multiple times, it's there multiple times. So that's the only real question, which maybe can be handled offline in the actual pull request. But other than that, things are stable.
My understanding was the spec text forbid that it said that if you had specified by, if you did an extension that specified by could only exist in, if like it would exist in the beginning one, then it couldn't exist in the extension.
Yeah, I believe I believe that's correct. I think the extension should be considered invalid in that case, if it's trying to override an existing directive.
And so is that a bug in the GraphQL.js extension implementation or the specified?
Sounds like
you remember you added a test for it, so it's like actually validated. Remember you like added specific test for SDL. We can figure out it, but I'm pretty sure you added like, and actually I said like it's redundant because we should not test every directive that it will be duplicating. Because we cannot do it for like skip, include, and deprecate, and something else. So we can figure out technical details there. Just to know that yeah, it should be validated like that. The only like I probably need to check one thing. If you created schema programmatically and when you extend it with SDL, it's because like you don't use directive second time. You kind of like once you specify URL programmatically one through SDL. So maybe we need to handle this case. But I think it's like implementation details. So spec is pretty sure in duplication.
In the agenda notes for today, I linked to a test case, and if you look there, we have like an extended by extend scalar foo, and we do it twice. And what I'm hearing, it sounds like that the second one should have thrown an error, and right now that's actually not the case.
Okay, so maybe it's a bug. So in any case, it's like internal detail we can figure out inside PR.
So
one thing, like, because like it's stage 2 and like it's blocked mainly because I try to minimize the scope for 15.0.0 release to align with like spec release. So technically it's like possible to match right now. So I encourage everybody to actually like check spec PR and with PR, because we changed the naming. So like name of directives changed from specify to specify by, and argument changed from by to URL, and introspection field change to specify by URL. So like if everybody okay with this change, if not, like it sounds like bike shading, but I think we need like consensus about this thing. I think like it's the last thing that we change in the last month or two. So if everybody okay, I think like it's pretty stable and ready to change. Because after we merged into GraphQL.js, any change in GraphQL.js would be breaking. So like it's better for everybody to review it before I merge.
Sounds like maybe we can just put some intensive pressure on there. And I mean, if you guys can figure this out in the next day or two, then we can include specified by in this next release cut. But Matt, it sounds like you have exactly the right framing of what the issue is. That test case does look wrong to me as well. It is a pretty interesting edge case. I don't know if we have any examples in the spec text itself for any case like this. I think all the other examples we have are when you have like the original type does or doesn't have a directive, and then the extension does or does not, and we explain that behavior, but not when there's two extensions. But you're exactly right that second one should cause a validation error.
And so I guess my initial thought here is that maybe we separate these two issues, because I'm sure I'd guess that this would apply for other directives, right? That should not be able to be. So maybe we could split these into two different like things to work on.
Yeah, I'll try to review it. So yeah, like rule called directive per location, unique directive per location. So it should be like unique in all senses. So yeah, I will check. It's probably a bug. I thought actually, like we introduced this validation pretty recently in 14.0.0. It was like a year ago, more than a year ago, but like it's not like 5 years ago. It's like yeah, probably we have a bug there.
I agree, Matt. If this is something that's affecting all extensions with directives, then we should treat that as a separate issue.
Cool. I'll create an issue for that and a test case that shows that happening with a different directive. And if that's the case, then maybe we can move forward with this and handle that separately.
Sounds great.
Cool. I think that wraps it for this.
I have another thing to add for the custom scaler. I actually also started implementing GraphQL Java, and overall it looks all fine, and it's like I don't see any major problems. The one edge case I think we should explicitly call out in one way one way or the other is what happens if somebody had already declared a directive with a specified name, a specified by name. I know it's an edge case, but I think we should call out what happens if. Just also from an implementation point of view, there should be some guidance how to deal with that.
Do you mean in the case of an extension?
No, like I have a SDL right now, and I have a custom directive called specified by. Now I update my GraphQL server, whatever, and I get now a built-in specified by. What happens?
So the way the code works in GraphQL.js right now is that if you specify your own directive with this, that will remain. This one is kind of like the default, and you would just be overriding that default. And I think then your GraphQL like server would be serving up a non-compliant schema, I guess.
Yeah, that's fine. And the only problematic aspect comes when you have special logic around the built-in directive. If you have, for example, logic that you don't want to print the built-in directive in the SDL, like if you print your schema and you have like logic, it's a built-in directive, so don't print it, then you need to kind of start distinguishing, it's a built-in directive called specified by, or the custom directive called specified by, in order to be consistent. So this follows up if you allow to override it, which again, I'm totally fine with either way, honestly, because it's an edge case and I think it's not super relevant, but it's an unspecified area of the spec, which also happens to be true for deprecated, for example. You can override deprecated at the moment, and then it kind of breaks a little bit when you print the schema, for example.
So, as I understand, schema printing is it's an implementation detail. It's not on a spec. Spec says.
We recently added that all built-in scalars, for example, should not be printed in the SDL, and there's another OpenPR which also says that built-in directives should not be printed in the schema, and in order to clarify this. But it's also like, for example, tools like Graphical, they filter out the built-in stuff. Like it comes in, like you can introspect it, but it never shows up in your schema explorer on the right. You know, like, so there's special logic around the built-in directives. And yeah, if you suddenly override deprecated, then it should probably show up because it's a custom one. So it's a little bit, again, unspecified area, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's, including any kind of guidance around this is a little bit of a mixed message, because we don't really like describe how to be compliant when you're not compliant. You know, it's like a little bit of a tautology. Like, how should you behave in cases where you're not compliant with the scheme, with the spec? It's in this edge case, we can talk about it as individuals, but I think it's going to be a challenging thing to capture in the spec.
But maybe I'm not understanding or making not clear, but it should explicitly in the spec, I think, what happens when you, what should happen when you declare the directive called deprecated, for example, or like specified by. It's not like the server is against the spec. It's just like, I think it's not covered yet, and we should make a call one way or the other. Like, you know, it's not, nobody is intentionally against it. It's just, it's an edge case. Right? You can do it. It's not illegal to do it, right?
I think it is illegal to do it. Technically, I mean, it's spec breaking to do it.
Is it?
Should we then state it?
Exactly. If it's a spec breaking, then it should be said it's not allowed. That's perfectly fine.
If it's not, then maybe we're missing something.
I think it's implicitly spec breaking because you can't have two directives defined with the same name, and the built-in one is always built in. So yeah, it kind of becomes implicitly breaking that if you're trying to find a second one with the same name, you now have two, and that's in violation of one of the validation rules.
The deprecate directive, for instance, it's not like a normal directive because it's actually only existing in the SDL. So we are not actually hosting it. I'm not exposing that I have this directive through my introspection.
Actually, you should, according to the spec, you should it, and the reference implementation expose it via introspection.
Really?
Yes.
Although we are, it's kind of. Okay.
I looked it up today because I wanted to understand what's happening. But yeah, I agree with Evan. It's actually implicitly, I would say, it's against the spec to define an own directive deprecated, and to kind of be consistent. We should state that it's going forward. forbidden to declare the directive called specified by, which I'm totally fine with from a personal point of view. I think it just should be included at least with one sentence so that the server implementations have something to deal with.
Yes, I think that's a good suggestion. So I think there's one thing that we can do is make the spec more clear. And I'm kind of combing through it now to look for other examples of cases where we do this. And we do this for scalar types. So we say, if you have a type called string, it must behave in these ways. And string is a built-in type, but basically what that one sentence means is that you can't supply your own type called string that has different behavior. Because anybody who's following along with the spec or building tools, as soon as they encounter a type and they see it's called string, they immediately want to guarantee that it's going to behave by the rules in the spec. I think the intent was to do the same for directives, and we're just a little bit more terse in our explanation of the directives than we could otherwise be. I did post a note in the chat about at least like a naming convention there.
Like, I think it's just because we're introducing a new directive, this kind of edge case becomes more obvious. You know, like nobody probably ever declared a custom directive called deprecated because it always was kind of from the start there. But like the possibility of happening now with the new directive is kind of increased, so we should be explicit. I agree.
I think we had the custom directive stuff in the last meeting of the year, last year, and I remember something like there was prefixing, like best practice would be prefixing the custom directive, right?
It's a note Lee just posted.
Yep,
Oh, really?
I posted a link in the chat to that note, and I added that I think a month or two ago after that meeting. But yeah,
somehow...
it's related. It's not the same thing as what Andy is suggesting, but it is related.
I think it's a very good addition because it kind of makes the possibility of introducing breaking changes in the future even less possible, because you kind of suggest, please prefix your directives to be sure, and that's a good thing.
I just wonder, well, you know, the thing is, you have to prefix like all the custom directives you do, right? You create, and there are just a handful of directives that are from the spec itself, right? So I'm not sure if this makes sense. Well, you cannot just prefix deprecated and specify by now, obviously, because that would be breaking too. But it just feels somehow weird to have the custom directives we create to have to be prefixed and the spec directives not, right?
Actually, there is like, I think there is a path forward because we didn't specify by URL to introspection. We're not only adding specify by directive, we didn't specify by URL. So technically, like if sometimes after this change, we add another directive, we can add specified by URL which point to a spec, and it's a way to detect it's like a standard behavior. So I'm not sure we need to like add anything right now. Just keep in mind if like later we decide to add something with more common name, like else, for example, or some more common, we can always use the same mechanism we want to use for scalars on like types or directive or anything else. Actually, like I kind of agree that forcing everybody to prefix everything will create bad developer experience. Like if you need to constantly put like couple or something in front, like people wouldn't want to use this thing. It would look ugly, especially like for things like federation when you add like a couple of directives.
Yeah, I mean that's why it's a non-normative note instead of a rule. Because I agree with the sentiment that it's a little bit weird, and I think ultimately this should be a judgment call by people. If you think that this directive is unique enough that the odds that the spec will ever include one are so rare, like, yeah, don't bother with a prefix. But if the working group is currently discussing defer, and you think, sweet, I'm going to go build an experimental version of defer, and you call it defer, and then it gets added to the spec with like a different behavior than yours, like, you're going to have a bad time, you know, call it experimental underscore defer or something like that. I think that's like really the reason why it's there, because that's really what's bitten us in the past, is where we've had like early versions of these ideas. So like @live is the reason that this particular note was put in there is because we've had shipped versions of GraphQL software with @live added that all have wildly different behavior, which is just going to make adding any kind of future @live even more difficult. But yeah, I don't want to force people to do that. And then kind of, Andy, going back to your original question of what should actual implementations do in these scenarios? I think, again, we can have a little bit of a judgment call, because you could decide either to be quite strict and say, I'm going to throw an error when you try to instantiate your schema. You know, you just like, you can't boot your GraphQL server if you do that. But you could also decide to be lenient and say like, all right, I'll override these things for you. Technically, you now have a non-compliant server, but we'll do our best to continue chugging along. I think either are reasonable, as long as you make it clear what's going to happen and keep people from shooting themselves in the foot by accidentally falling down this path.
Do you mind if I ask a quick question, Lee? Sorry, Andy?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, like I have like two goals. Like my personal opinion is like to be more strict, and I would honestly prefer if we say, please reject a custom directive called specified by. But more importantly, we should be explicit in the spec and say you can choose either way if we decide so. So like
that point, we would definitely agree on. I'm taking a note to make that change as an editorial change before we do a spec cut.
Great, that's great.
This is somewhat apropos, but I'll just mention it, and we can sort of postpone this discussion later until we've had some time to maybe talk about it offline. But I'm just curious whether this issue has been considered in the context of like namespaces before. I did a search in GraphQL WG. We're interested in namespaces at Facebook just at a very early stage. And I saw a mention of Facebook, I think back, or excuse me, of schema namespaces back in like 2016, 17. But it was sort of brief and there wasn't much in the notes about it. Just thought it might be interesting to bring it up now. Has it been considered recently? It might help us with some of these issues.
I think it has not been considered recently. There definitely was a lot of discussion on this in like 2017 or 18, I think. And at the time, I at least had a pretty strong opinion that it was more of a solution looking for a problem than it was a solution to a problem that GraphQL faced directly. And especially with some experience working in languages that use namespaces, it can be really confusing if you're kind of new to that, and especially when you encounter a case where you have two things that are named the same thing but in different namespaces. It can kind of get tricky to track which thing you're looking at, and especially since I think the last time namespaces were proposed, there was an idea to have the built-ins in a separate namespace than an application developer's schema, and kind of every iteration that we looked at just forced you to do something like GraphQL.string instead of just string when you wanted to reference a string type, or you'd have to do like myapp.type instead of type. So you always have to resolve to the namespace that you want to be in, and doing that just ended up kind of being really tricky. I think we didn't end up with anything that actually solved a problem. It just kind of introduced more oddities. I don't think that's a means that namespaces are a dead end. I think it just means that the timing wasn't right. We didn't find a particular path that was exciting. I think, especially since these issues still kind of bubble up time and again, we can kind of crystallize exactly what the problem is, how many people face this problem, and then what a namespace solution tactically looks like, kind of from first principles within the realm of GraphQL, that could still have legs in the future.
Gotcha. And just briefly, is there, if you could have any pointers to some of those different plans or proposals, I may have just not found them when I searched. If you happen to have them somewhere, I wouldn't mind reviewing them.
I think they were all in live working group meetings. So they should either be in the working group notes, maybe, but I think they were all kind of discussed live.
Okay, thanks.
Otherwise, there was some decent representation of that in both the GraphQL JS repo. There was a proposal for namespaces. In the GraphQL spec repo, there was a proposal for namespaces.
Perfect, thanks.
Cool.
Thank you, everyone.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the next deprecating input fields. Andy, you want to take it away?
Yeah, we have an open pull request which was started in 2017, maybe. Let me have a look again. So quite some time ago, 2018. And this pull request discusses adding like the deprecation metadata to also argument and input object fields, which is kind of like, I think that's a missing piece simply in the spec so far. You can deprecate output fields, but you can't deprecate input fields and arguments. And from a practical point of view, that's something definitely that happens in the wild, that you want to deprecate an input field sometimes. And this was never really moved forward. And I just wanted to discuss if anybody sees serious blockers with it or thoughts about it, because overall it looks quite straightforward from my point of view, but maybe I'm missing something here.
So I actually today reviewed and actually remembered entire discussion. So idea was a guy create PR and for spec and for repo, but he didn't show up on working group. So we kind of discussed it without him, and because he like something probably happened, he just could not like join the call. An agreement was that after GraphQL JS PR is ready, like it can be fast forward actually. So like, it's my fault I didn't ping the guy. So I think like solution in this case would be just ping original after if he want to do it. If not, like, somebody else can adapt it. For example, Andy, if you're interested. But I think we need to ping original guy first and see if he's interested in continue it. And however, if this guy like didn't respond, I can, and whoever like substitute him don't want to mess with GraphQL.js, I can help like with GraphQL.js. So PR, I review it actually today because I saw item on agenda. It's like it's ready. The only thing missing is introspection part, which we will discuss afterwards. So basically, it will require again one more flag. Actually, no, it don't because it does, yeah. Because on ARCs we don't have introspection field, so it will require adding more flag or introducing two-stage introspection, which would be like next topics. I think it's pretty obvious what to do. Like ping a guy if he not responds, like somebody should adopt it.
Yeah, I'm happy to help out if the GraphQL.js PR is the only thing missing, for example. So maybe we can work together on this, Ivan. It's because, yeah, again, if nobody has like big objection, I think it's pretty straightforward, and it's not a new semantic or so. It's like just you have more expressions about what you want to deprecate.
Yep, sounds good to me. I think it just needs a champion.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's basically all for this topic. So you want
Do
me
you
to
want
move on?
to, yeah, you want to follow on with the Unicode support one?
Yes. So a little bit on top of this, this is more in the realm of hygiene, of like keeping the spec relevant and keeping like the spec actually up to date with the real life implementations. It's currently, for those of you who don't know, we have a restriction inside the GraphQL grammar that we only allow Unicode code points from the basic multilingual pane, which is which covers basically everything written, but it doesn't cover emojis, for example. So and it's in real life actually like our implementation GraphQL Java and actually GraphQL Ruby also, and I'm guessing more allow all Unicode characters to be put into, especially for example, descriptions. Like that's the most important part, like inside strings. So inside a description string or inside maybe an argument, you are allowed to put in even code points from outside the basic plane. And there was a PR from you, Lee, which you started like, I think quite early, 4 years ago or something. And there was a little bit of discussion. I think then it was abandoned. And I wanted to circle back on this and also ask thoughts about it or like challenges around it.
Yeah, I'll give some color since it was my pull requests and it's over 3 years old now. I think I abandoned it because it was clear that I just didn't have the context or time to take it to conclusion. There were a lot of like specific edge cases with how multilingual planes work in Unicode that, at least at the time, I just didn't have confidence that the change I was making was the right one. I was asking for a lot of help from Ben Hamilton, who you can see like a bunch of his comments on the diff, who is more of a Unicode expert, but ultimately got to the point where I just realized that I was just not going to be able to do this well. So I think there's no objection to supporting multilingual planes. I don't think. I think it would be a good change to make. I think there are a couple open questions that were left when working on this. So I think you can kind of just read through the comments on that pull request to get most of them. But I think the biggest one is like, what happens when you're in an environment that doesn't have good support for multilingual plain Unicode? Honestly, part of the reason why this got tricky is JavaScript's just really bad at this. Like, only in very recent versions of the JavaScript spec is there multilingual plain support on string literals. And so just writing a reference implementation at the same time that I was working on spec implementation just got kind of really tricky. So as long as we can kind of get past those hurdles, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be able to make this work.
Also, there in .NET, they just introduced an UTF-8 JSON parser, for instance, to get away from having to pass always a UTF-16 strings in high performance scenarios for the servers. And also we for Chocolate, we implemented also UTF-8 GraphQL parser that works really on the incoming byte streams. So it makes things bigger, like the strings. And strings in .NET are immutable, so once you produce them, you have to garbage collect them. So there are also things that are to be considered because of going for UTF-16.
Well, that's a really good point. So there's actually potentially performance implications of supporting multilingual plain.
I just want to add on the meta level, the whole discussion about like Unicode stuff and encoding is very similar to actually like time zone stuff, in my opinion. It's often a topic which like it's the edge cases gets really tricky, and the common understanding of it is sometimes not there. So I'm really also not a full Unicode expert, but for example, one aspect which is kind of inside the spec, it's conflated. Two things is like, one thing is like Unicode support in general, and the other thing is how to encode this Unicode things, actually two different things. And UTF-8 and UTF-16 is like two possible things how to encode something. And it's an important implementation detail, but for example, the spec could also be more clear that this is outside of the spec, for example. And so like JavaScript, I actually looked up how JavaScript in the current spec, I don't know which spec you looked at, probably an older one, Lee, but like in the current one, they actually allow full Unicode support in all strings in the source text. And I think the only open question a little bit around it is maybe escape strings. Like if we want to allow like escape strings with more than 4 digits for code points outside of the BMP, that's maybe the most critical part. But all other things, I could not see a real issue so far. But I agree with you that there could be a performance implication if a system doesn't support it yet.
Yeah, it's not about a system that doesn't support it yet. Like in .NET, the actual string is a UTF-16 string, but there's a lot of work around. Pardon?
Sorry to interrupt, but like I don't understand what you mean. The actual.
Yeah, so the default string in .NET is UTF-16. But that is quite large. If you are pulling in UTF-8 data, it's much more efficient to pass UTF-8 data. And like we are never, like when a GraphQL request comes into our server, we are actually never persisting it as a string. We are passing the incoming JSON stream as really on the bytes. And we are then shifting the bytes a little to get even the GraphQL request out there and to never create strings for it. So basically, to pass in a very performant way. And so we had to do a lot of work around UTF-8. I'm just saying that you are inflating then the strings by default if we went for stating that GraphQL has to be UTF-16 in every case.
I think this is not what I'm saying. You can do UTF-8, you can do UTF-16, you can do it, encode whatever you want. Like the spec doesn't dictate how you encode stuff in any way. Like the reference implementation in JavaScript, in Java, for example, also, it's all internally actually UTF-16 encoded in Java and JavaScript. But this has nothing to do with how you represent a GraphQL string literal inside a GraphQL query or SDL. Like you can encode it in whatever you want. I'm just saying,
because at this moment, the GraphQL spec says it's UTF-8.
No, it doesn't. The GraphQL
but
spec.
There is a mention.
Well,
the last time I read it, it said that it's in the UTF-8 space. Let me check.
Well, inside the scalar spec of GraphQL, it talks about UTF-8 strings. But I think this is the wrong aspect actually, because it conflates how something is encoded and what it represents. And inside the grammar,
if I could just interrupt for a bit, this is just wrong. It's there. This circles back to me saying that I am not a Unicode expert. I wrote the original spec for our scalar types, and I'm pretty sure that's just completely incorrect. Like, what Andy's suggesting is what it should be, and the fact that our string type declares the encoding of the Unicode is just weird. Like anyone looking at that understands Unicode probably thinks GraphQL is a joke, because I'm just like bad at my job. So I
didn't mean it in a critical way, please.
I'm not saying that you did. I'm being self-critical. In the sake of time, because I think we can treating this as a holistic problem is actually pretty hard. It's part of the reason why I had to put this down on the ground and walk away from it. I'm going to suggest that if you want to pick this back up as a champion, Andy, that you snap it into a couple pieces and take on those individual pieces rather than the whole. I think it's worthwhile to, whenever you talk about one of those pieces, to talk about the vision is to get to full Unicode support for GraphQL, but we want to talk about those as individual pieces so that it's easier to kind of think about the implications of each. I think the first one is going to be really easy to do. It's just going to be to comb through the spec and make sure that we're just super consistent with language whenever we talk about characters or code points or Unicode. Sometimes we say characters, but a character and a code point are not the same thing. I learned this after I wrote these things in the spec. Whenever we say character in the spec, we really mean code point. Anytime we say UTF-8, we really just mean Unicode. So I think having a first pass is just like an editorial pass that makes it general. I think another thing you could do is just change what code points are allowed. Right now we say any code points outside of the basic plane are not allowed. And that means that a bunch of implementations are non-compliant because they accept code points outside of that range. That's also weird. We can fix that. I think that opens some questions for what parsers do. We might end up with some version of like a note that you don't have to. Maybe we make it optional that parsers support outside this plane to mitigate performance issues. But I think it'd be best to have that conversation locally scoped to that one specific issue. And then that also kind of tags on the escape sequence, if we want to have a multi-plane escape sequence, which was also kind of all these things were packaged together in that one original pull request from me a couple of years ago. And I think I just probably did a bad job doing that. I think if with a better champion and splitting it out into separate pieces of work, we can probably get that landed.
Okay.
And just anecdotally, the null character has in the wild been problematic in databases and things. Postgres, for example, doesn't like the null character, generally speaking. And it's, I think, valid in the BMP by default, and maybe even allowed in GraphQL by default. Anyways, just null is just another one of those things that I guess needs to be carefully considered in terms of interop.
Yeah, this is also another interesting thing, system interoperability and encoding is a whole nother beast. And I think Lee is absolutely right. It's kind of a hygiene thing where we need to have multiple paths, multiple smaller aspects. And I just want to get an initial feeling if there are fundamental things that prevent us of moving forward, or if we could try to attack it. And I'm happy with the sentiment that we could try to take it.
Yeah, full Unicode support would be wonderful.
Awesome. I'm really happy that you're looking into this, especially since you kind of comb through a bunch of old stuff that could use some revitalization. This one is great.
It's just as much as over time when GraphQL matures, I stumble across more these edge cases, and I feel, whoa, what's going on there? Okay, yeah, thanks for this.
Yeah, I want to mention one small note. As Google Summer of Code, I submit a project for cuts, GraphQL cuts that we discussed. Michael bring this topic in autumn. So, and I promised to do something, but I'm lagging behind with a lot of stuff, including this one. So I submitted for Google Summer of Code. And since Unicode is not coming to this spec, hopefully by the end of summer we'll have cuts. And I think it would be great to have Unicode test there, so we can have a half a year to ensure that all implementation agrees on the stuff. I think with changes like that, it's critical to have common test suite, so we don't deviate more.
Agreed. Andy, I think the next agenda item is also yours, and Yeah, do you want to
Yes.
pick it up?
Yeah, after a little bit more two dry topics, I think this is one where we could talk a little bit more about what we want to do, or like what kind of possibilities we have. So the fundamental challenge we have right now and going on forward, I think this challenge is getting more urgent to address, is the introspection query is like a normal GraphQL query, right? Like you have to specify every field you want. And we already have one field added over time, description, which means for clients, in order to get all the metadata, like all the introspection data, they often have to use, or they try to use like a two-phase introspection way. They try to query the introspection, including description. If the error comes back saying description is not supported, then it's an old version of the server. So they go back and query introspection without description field. So we just we add 3 new fields now in the new in the soon to be released spec, and it's like we add the description field to schema, I think. We add like a is repeatable attribute to scalars, and at some point the custom scalar specified by is also added. So now suddenly we have like including description 4 fields, which each of them theoretically could be optionally supported or not yet supported by the server. And this makes this whole multi-phase querying round trip from a client, I think, very, very awkward. And I think it's a general challenge with introspection and how to evolve introspection data over time. And I wanted to just ask, what do you think about it? Should we take this? What are the options?
But why is it awkward? I mean, what we do for all the tools that we now have is really a two-phase introspection. And the first call gets all those optional stuff. So we know after the first call that which of those 4 things actually are there. We are also checking for the subscription type, because in schema stitching, we also have sometimes very old GraphQL servers in the backend. So we are also asking for the subscription type. Is it there? Is it not there? Subscription there? Is it not there? And after that, we are creating from that information the actual introspection query. So it really is always a two-phase introspection. Just the first phase might change over time, but that doesn't matter really.
Yeah, I think like we discussed it, probably like you missed it because like time zones was one of the like working groups. We discussed it. I sent the link to presentation, and Lee initially suggested the idea of two-stage introspection when first you ask like what fields are existing and when you form a query. I made like a presentation and we discussed it, like everybody agreed. When I worked behind this implementation, Mikhail implemented it, and thank you for that. I actually like reviewed your implementation. So, and it's coming to GraphQL.js. I already agreed with graphical guys; they will use it. The only thing is that I don't want to add like I don't want to Pro 15.0.0, and I promised Jesse and other like maintainers not to add more breaking stuff or like experimental stuff and finally release 15.0.0. So just for this release, I added simple solution with flags for every possible things. So like after 15.0.0 release, I will put deprecation, get the introspection query, and we'll do like proper two-phase like on the slides. I already have a code, just like postpone until like release. So today I finally merged like last PR and I'm ready to release release candidate 2. So I will create PR for that. And I think we all can synchronize like our implementation. Mikhail, me, and GraphQL Java, and others.
Yeah, I think
by the way, I will add it. Yeah. Yeah,
Like,
I
can
will
you
add the
explain?
US reviewer. So if you open like presentation, it's I sent the link in the chat. So it's like there is like some little bit different details, but basically on the fourth slide, not on the fourth slide, like one of the slides, yeah, slide number 10. You can see, you can ask a server what types, what fields on introspection type it has. So like in Mikhail case, he asked like all the types, what fields they have. I personally think like it's too much traffic, so we can just ask what fields introspection types has, and it's like minor implementation data. I will add all of you as like reviewers for PR, and think we can discuss it and figure out the best strategy.
Yeah, we're just doing that because of a bug of a very early Hot Chocolate server version where we spelled the type wrong in order to the argument, and that's why we actually ask without the argument. But in our JavaScript tooling, we're actually asking for the specific types.
Okay. Yeah. Happy. I thought like maybe there is some thought process behind it.
Yeah, we will switch it off. I think there are the older version that had this bug is not anymore in use, so we'll streamline that.
I have a couple of thoughts on this. One is that I do think it's worth backing up a bit and thinking if there are different solutions. Like, is there something that in the future could replace introspection? I think it's at least worth the thought experiment. So Andy, if you feel strongly about this, or if anybody else feels strongly about this, I don't want to set things up so that that's not a path that we can explore. We might decide that everything we explored down that path isn't worth doing, but it's better to explore it and say it's not worth doing than not explore it and keep asking the question. So just want to make sure that that part is clear. The other part is that we've been talking about this two-phase introspection thing, I feel like forever. Like, it's been a long time that we've been talking about this. And it's one thing to have like a handful of like different tool, like the Hot Chocolate tools have a variant of this. The GraphQL.js core has like a more minor version of this, and Yvonne has like a more sophisticated version. Mikhail was contributing some version. It seems to me that if introspection is going to be core to tooling, then ultimately this same bit of code is going to get replicated by every language, which means we should describe exactly how it should work. We should do that in the spec. So I think if anybody has gotten to the point where they think that their two-phase introspection is pretty bulletproof and future-proof, then let's start evolving that into spec text description and add that as a chapter to the introspection section. I think that would be super valuable for people who are encountering exactly the same question and aren't as plugged in as everybody on the call is. And they're like, oh yeah, all my tools are breaking. How should I handle this? And instead of like looking up, source code implementation of other tools, or like at best finding notes from these meetings, they should be able to open up that spec and be like, oh, okay, there's the answer to my question right there. Oh, cool, look, and here's even like an algorithm description and like a human readable description of how that thing should work. I don't know if anyone wants to volunteer to take a stab at that, but I think that would be hugely valuable to have.
Just as clarification, it would be a non-normative node, right? So we're not forcing people to exact same wiring or exact same mechanism.
I wouldn't, because each tool maybe has also a different need of information. Maybe a tool just wants to fetch the type names. Then they don't need a two-phase introspection. It would be just if you want to get all the type information from the system, this is a way to do it in a safe way.
It is a little bit weird. I do think it's worth kind of like thinking through if there's anything normative there. I don't know if there is or not. it sounds like it's probably non-normative, but still valuable to include. But I wouldn't get too hung up on the details of that stuff first. I think at first we should just kind of say, if we agree that it would be valuable to capture that stuff outside the context of source code, then we should just start figuring out how to do it. And then we can get into the editorial details of how exactly you want to frame that.
Yeah,
I think
Also,
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Andy. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
I just want to say, like, on a meta level, I think introspection is like an extremely critical part of the whole GraphQL ecosystem, and making it clear how to implement it and how to use it correctly, especially now with a lot of variant and new fields. It's even if it's a non-normative node, it's something we should at least discuss, I think.
yeah, I'm totally okay with non-normative node. It's like I actually like that flexibility of introspection. If it wasn't flexible, we would not we cannot do like two-stage introspection. So like idea that introspection is the same query allow us to use this trick right now. Like if we fixate like introspection query like years ago, we would not be able to do two-stage introspection. So I'm and partly people have idea of extensions to introspection, which is another topic, and like let's not go there yet. But that's why I partly for keeping it non-normative. So it's like when people experimented with extensions, they like able to do that, or like if they have certain use case. Like I remember Sashko submitted an issue that allow Apollo client to get possible types for abstract, just for abstract types. So like partial introspection is actually valuable in some cases. Maybe it's not dominant cases, but it's still valuable. So I don't think we should say it's like only like that. But as non-normative node, I'm like totally okay.
Cool. Michael, were you gonna volunteer to take a crack at that?
Yes, I would. And I think Ivan can review it. So then we get all the gist in there.
Yeah, and like small note, I'm also not sure about that, but I like your note, Lee, about considering other possibilities. At least like we need to write like why we refuse them. So like previously I submitted RFC, I sent it to chat. When you basically like mark field as like server can reject it if it doesn't know this field. So it's like way simpler solution, not involving two-stage. And it's kind of like weird in some senses, and it's like breaking like a lot of things. But I believe if we add something to spec, we need to consider like all other options. So like one thing is to add like this mechanism for chocolate GraphQL.js, GraphQL Java, and see what the consequences is. Another thing is to add stuff in the spec. So like I think like a barrier for spec entry should be higher. We should maybe have like small RFC, discussing other possibilities and why it's not working.
Yeah, I agree. I don't want to cajole anyone into doing those, but certainly if anyone feels strongly about writing them up, I do think it's, you know, while it doesn't feel great to have RFCs end up in the rejected state, it is actually like a pretty useful way to document process. And so when someone pops up and says like, hey, why isn't there a field that I can call and get like one big JSON blob that has everything? It's like, we should talk about that. If we decide it's good, we'll do it. And if we decide it's not good, then we can forever have an issue that we can point to that's rejected that has context on why we're not following a particular path. So if that's something that anybody feels strongly about doing, I think it would be valuable to have that kind of thing. But again, I know it's like, it's a weird thing to kind of follow that process. I just want to make it clear that that could be still a useful thing to do. But I'm excited that we're talking about this. I think, you know, we've been talking about two-stage introspection for a long time, and getting it out of our brains and onto, you know, one form that's not specific to any one language is going to be pretty valuable. So I'm looking forward to that.
And as far as the introspection goes in the current way, I also was, I mean, I was talking with Ivan about that when I was implementing it. And I always thought the GraphQL SDA would be the best way to express the schema. But having a way to query the system for type information is basically offering a way, like I can fetch the type information like I can fetch data. It's a very, like a very self-sufficient way GraphQL works. And I think we shouldn't break that.
I'm pretty sure I agree with you.
Yeah, that's all from my side, what I wanted about this topic. It's great that somebody picks it up and gets some clarity out of that. That's great. Thank you.
Awesome. Just to kind of highlight why I think it's important to put this in the spec, and then after this we can move on. We already in the spec have a section on schema introspection that just lists out a full introspection query and exactly what that looks like. So basically we have one phase schema introspection fully specified, even though like you could totally ignore that if you wanted to. So I think making sure that that thing stays up to date and then including a two-phase variant of that, there's already clearly a spot in the spec where we could even put it. So it seems like we got good precedence. But anyway, I want to make sure we have plenty of time for defer and stream. Seems like there's a lot to discuss there. So I'll hand it to Kiwei.
Hey everyone, so I basically submitted a pull request that added a little bit of content to Liliana's initial RFC. The pull request itself basically added some background of alternative solutions of traditional request response in order to improve your latency, such as the split query, or you can do prefetch. As well as highlighted what we did, difference between subscription and defer and stream. We highlighted that the use case of defer and stream is not to reflect real-time changes. And what that means is the implementation are not required to reflect any changes happening with the interleaving mutations. So appreciate comments on that and thoughts, definitely. So as we're trying to come up with the phase one of the proposal, I realize I have a lot of questions about what to include in the defer and stream spec and what to not include. So I'll send the comment link to the chat. The very first question I have is, what I feel is defer itself is a rather low-level imperative paradigm. It basically tells you, execute this piece of code asynchronously. One of the things that during our experimentation with defer is that we realized something that is more high-level would actually be more valuable. So for example, you could it's a way for a client to express, this is a piece of data that I might need in the future. And the way you can execute it, it's totally up to the server. The server can deliver it synchronously or deliver it asynchronously, or just totally not deliver it until the client side sends a signal to say, I need the data now, and then we start the execution. So it's similar to other languages promise and future where you can implicitly trigger the execution or explicitly trigger the execution. So for that reason, I was wondering, like, what do people think for tabling the defer part in favor of a more higher abstraction in the future to come?
I think this is exactly the right conversation that we should be having. The way that I think the highest quality RFCs that have gone through this process have worked is they start out not by describing a solution or a change, but by describing a problem space and the solutions that exist in that problem space and weighing them against each other. That takes a lot of work, but it yields much higher quality results because like these are exactly the kinds of questions that come out of that process. So it sounds like you're already backing up and thinking about this at a broader level, which is awesome. So I want to support you doing that. And if you can kind of find ways to capture that in this RFC document, I think that can be a good way to sort of like reframe this document around the problem that we want to solve, and then talk about defer and stream as two potential solutions in that space. But sounds like what you're describing is some kind of like prefetch decorator or something similar to that, but I don't know exactly what it looks like, but I just want to say that I would support any kind of exploration beyond kind of the solutions that we've already considered.
Yeah, I think what I was trying to get at is for the defer and stream, we have been talking about those two as a same solution, but whether this is more valuable if we just try to standardize stream by itself and then leave defer to some more higher abstraction directive in the future.
I mean, anecdotally, we would definitely use the more promise-like higher abstraction, but we don't have a whole lot of use for defer right now. So, you know, anecdote, not data, but still.
It might make sense to separate them. I do think it will open questions. I guess it depends on how exactly stream ends up working, and if stream takes on the similar properties that defer currently has. The original version that I had pitched, and things very much may have changed since then, was stream would operate on arrays of things where defer would operate on singletons of things. So describing the difference between waiting on everything in a field versus waiting on everything consecutively. I think there's a clear parallel in React concurrent lands about they have this like concur list. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but something like that allows you to wait for things in order in the array. So that was kind of the original idea behind that. But if that's going to shift, I think that's totally fine. We should allow space for that to change.
Yeah, I'll definitely capture the thoughts about defer in the RFC a little bit more, and then just capture the challenges with the more low-level imperative defer. And basically the concern is whether if we standardize defer right now, is it going to make it harder to standardize something that is more abstract and actually more useful in the future?
That's really hard to know without a little more exploration into what that future abstraction would look like, I guess. But I'm very curious.
That makes sense. The second question that I have is at Facebook, when we experimented with defer and stream, we added a lot of like supplemental features such as batched payload, and if arguments in your stream and defer directives for easy A/B testing. So those are features I was wondering, like, which would be valuable to include in the spec, and what would be like sort of like we want to make it like the minimal version possible. Yeah, just kind of want to get people's ideas on like whether it would be very useful to include the batch mode, or do we want to leave it out and just work on the simplest solution possible at this stage?
That's a good question. I think some things to think about as you're working out that answer is sort of one, back to your original question of, does doing one thing make it harder to do another thing? I think that's always like a great question to keep in mind, that if from a high level, I agree with what you're suggesting, like find the thing that is simplest and propose that. But if the thing that is simplest actually makes it harder to do the more sophisticated thing down the line, then it could become more problematic. Also, if there's cases where it's not necessarily about it being simple or complex, it's about just making sure that we fully describe behavior. So you have this thing describing how defer or stream might interact with include and skip. It feels like we'd have to describe that. You know, that's just going to come up as a question of, when these two things are next to each other, what should the behavior be? And it should be very well defined what that behavior should be.
Yeah, and one of the things, go ahead, someone.
Oh, sorry, I had like a more general thing maybe when you're finished.
Yeah, I think a lot of these are just more detailed questions when I am working on the stage 1 proposal right now and not sure about what are the things we should be describing and what are the things like we'll probably want to leave out. Yeah. So Andy, go ahead.
Like I really like your push of bringing this more into the open after experiencing inside Facebook over the last couple of years with it. I would be really interested to know a little bit more about your overall system, how you implemented it. Not maybe in every detail, but because on a practical point of view, if I look at this, yes, we can talk a lot about how a specific thing acts on the front end, maybe on the client side, or how it influences your query. But at the end, I also have practical questions: which system actually supports streaming? Like, and one, I remember we had a discussion, I don't know, 1.5 years ago in this working group, and somebody from Facebook also shared some thoughts about it, and or Lee, maybe it was you, like, and they mentioned that all of these stream and defer semantics really depend on the underlying infrastructure of Facebook also to bring in streaming data. And I would be really interested to know at least a little bit more about how this works and how this is, how this architecture makes sense for other systems. Because like defining a defer or stream directive and then really not be able to implement it in a meaningful way, I think defeats the purpose. So I think we should make sure that the overall idea makes sense.
I agree.
Yeah.
I also would be interested in that.
Because, yeah, I just have like very simple question, like, okay, stream sounds good, but my database allows me to query a table. It doesn't stream back easily. Is it implemented as a pub/sub mechanism? Is it like a queuing system maybe on your side? What are the patterns you saw, or what kind of use cases and solutions you found?
There was actually a good talk by Robert Zhu when he was in Facebook about that. Like he explained that there, in some cases, needs to be a reactive data system to support some of those real-time features, and there was something like that in that, like explaining a bit more deeper how that really works, or how you can bring those systems to life. I would be totally interested in that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for defer and stream at Facebook, we basically it's an attempt to represent the future and promises in a lot of common languages as stream and defer. And we're not using pub/sub for stream and defer for the exact reason that we are not here to keep a long-lived connection and to reflect real-time changes. So the connection is actually very short-lived. We I don't think we have the stream mechanism to the underlying databases. So what happens is people would actually create several like futures and then like put them in their event loop so that like we stream things back in that order. So that was basically the underlying mechanism. We actually allow people to implement their own like async iterator or async generator under the hood. So this is just an API to hook into those product logic. Does that answer the question?
I think it starts to. This stuff is always kind of hard to talk about without, you know, digging deep into the weeds. But if you or anybody else working on the team is ever interested in doing like a tech talk or anything or a blog post or anything on this, I think you'd have some rabid readers. One thing I wanted to point out is, you know, something that we really deliberated over when working on subscriptions is describing an abstraction for both content delivery and for you have to model how things are returned in a response, and you have to model how you get information. And in like vanilla GraphQL queries, all we really had to describe was promises. And we didn't even really do that particularly well, I don't think, but we just said like sometimes when you call this field, it can be asynchronous, which means everything has to be asynchronous. And that just implied that there was a promise. And so the modeling of the underlying data was you have to ask for something, you wait, and then you get the data back. And the modeling response was you get a request, you execute, and then you send the data back. So fairly straightforward. With subscriptions, it became way less clear, and exactly the same kind of questions that we're hearing now were coming up, which was like, okay, we can get some kind of idea of how this might get sent back from a GraphQL server, but like, what is that GraphQL server doing under the hood? So with subscriptions, we ended up describing two ideas. We described source stream and response stream. So you can like find these in the spec. They're like right under the executing subscriptions section. And response stream is actually the important one. Like response stream describes how the GraphQL service responds back to a client that's asking for something. But what was like not actually required, but ended up being really valuable was this source stream concept. And the source stream is like really, like it even says this is application specific, but it allowed us to describe behavior in the spec by some underlying low-level mechanism that basically is an async iterator. I think the JavaScript reference implementation even uses async iterator to represent this idea. But it was really important to describe that because it just made it really clear that if you were going to go build this, like this was at least the abstraction that you had to uphold, if it wasn't even like the specific technical detail. So there is a question of, is there a execution logic that consumes event streams? Is there execution logic that only consumes promises? Like, do you need one or the other in order for this to work? Or is there some new concept that makes defer and stream work the way we expect them to work? My sense is that all the concepts that we need are already described, but I think it's going to be an open question. One thing that might help is, you know, kind of jumping the gun and going all the way to like, if we had to write an execution spec text, like what would that look like? It would at least kind of force you to write it down in a way that would start to consume these things that are already described. So when the question comes up of like, all right, well, what are your underlying systems actually look at? You can kind of point to a line there and say like, oh, okay, yeah, well, we have a database that speaks streaming and that goes here. And it's like, and this database does not, but we fake it in this way. And then that lets us model this abstraction that we're writing down. But I think this is going to be the hardest part of defer and stream by far, is helping people understand how they would actually go implement this thing. Hopefully that was useful.
Yeah, definitely. I actually, what was interesting for me when I was implementing defer and stream is that those two actually behave very differently. So with AdStream, what happens is we basically allow people to return us. So your resolver, instead of return a value, returns an async iterator. Or some similar for other languages. However, for a defer, what happens is we actually need to change the executor logic, and then basically saying this is an asynchronous code, and we're not going to await on that. Instead, we're going to create another queue in our GraphQL executor, and then store this deferred piece of code in that queue, and then after we return the first response, we're going to come back and then resolve every resolver that we delayed in the queue. So that's kind of a different kind of implementation and have a different feeling into that. Specifically, when Prada developers, they need to write Prada logic for the async iterator if they want to use AdStream. And they don't need to do anything if that's a defer. So that was kind of interesting, and that and what you just said made me feel like maybe like there is an abstraction that we did not describe for the defer itself, because like the idea of a queue, the idea of when the underlying resolver code is asynchronous, the executor can choose to not await on it, and instead just put it into a queue.
Cool. Yeah, I think it might be useful as an exercise to write out, low quality spec text, just to kind of force you to exit the hack code base and like re-implement the ideas. Because it's also a way to take like real code that you've written and put it in front of other people, and that way we can all kind of look at the same thing. So hopefully by iterating on that process, we can get to a state where everyone can just kind of read that and understand what all the abstractions involved are.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly how we implemented it in the reference implementation.
Very cool. That's
great. So a couple more questions is that we have a lot of additional context that we felt would be useful to the end user of different stream. They're not necessarily going to be helpful for the implementers of different streams, such as like what are the intended use cases for those things. And it doesn't feel the spec is the right place to put those content, but it does feel like helpful. So I was wondering, what are some common suggestions about those pieces of information? Like where do we present them?
I think we can err on the side of including that stuff in the spec. There's lots of examples already of non-normative notes scattered throughout the spec that make suggestions about how and why you might use various things. My rule of thumb is if the FAQ for GraphQL should be interleaved with the spec when possible. If when reading the spec you have a question, we should do our best to answer that. And in that way, the spec is more than just a description of how to implement GraphQL. It's actually kind of a way to learn it along the way. So I saw some of the ones that you've noted in your comment about, especially around the performance stuff. I think that's hugely useful to talk about, because the one thing that scares me the most about proposals like this is people misunderstanding what they are, thinking it's magic performance pixie dust, sprinkling it all over everything they do, really like regressing the perceived quality of all the stuff that they're writing, end up with this like really confusing thing because now they've got like streams coming left and right. It's really hard to build clients, and then basically conclude that GraphQL is too complicated, too buggy, too slow. Like that would be really sad. So I think having some guidance on why and how you would use these features and what countermeasures you should consider are extremely relevant.
Yeah. So it sounds like we should try to first include it in the spec, and then if that becomes like too much, like we can potentially move into an FAQ section.
That sounds right.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much.
Yeah, we have best practices page also on GraphQL.org, which is speak more like even more
Yeah.
like about best practices. So it's also another place because at the moment we don't have frequently asked question. Lee created a repo, but like nobody volunteered to work on it. So FAQ like stuck, but we have best practices page. But obviously it's like when we merge it pretty late in the stage because another like comment about RFC. One of the things I'm not using GraphQL, so I not experience problems for which like D4 and streamer solutions. So for me, like I'm just like doing executor and other stuff. So. But I noticed when we discussed subscriptions, it was two mechanisms. One is to create RFC in a spec repo, and also Robert use issues. So he tried to ask like isolated questions. Should we support multiple subscription in one query or not? Should transport be unidirectional or bidirectional? And he creates separate issues for each like such question, and he tried to make it really narrow, so discussion is not going wild. So if I think it's also like good mechanism. And what happened back then, it's like a group of people formed who was really interested in subscription, and they constantly discussing like with issues on the repo. So it's actually moved RFC forward, because for other issues like for input unions, we don't have like big philosophical kind of questions. We just need to choose like a mechanism. So RFC is like fully sufficient for what we're doing, but for like with totally new stuff, like if you feel like it's useful, you can create issues.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's really good feedback, and that also helps like narrow down like a lot of the questions into like their individual. We can move them separately. Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's all the questions that I have for the proposal so far. One of the like more housekeeping things I was wondering is the current RFC considered the strawman, like the phase 0 proposal?
I think right now it is that.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe it's required spec text for stage 1, right?
Yeah. So the current RFC that Liliana wrote, because it wasn't marked with phase 0, so I wasn't sure if there is a specific procedure that we need to do in order to mark that with a phase 0.
So I believe I mark it like stage 0 because like everything got marked as stage 0 initially, and I need to check criteria on stage 1.
Okay.
I think
the stage 1 entrance criteria, it's in the GraphQL spec contributing file. I can post a link just to save people from clicking around. There's a link in the chat. The most important entrance criteria is that there's a clear champion, which QA, if you want to be that champion, then that's great. There can also be multiple champions. So Liliana,
I want to ask if Liliana also are interested in being the champion.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's great. Yeah, maybe we can like start working on like try to change the spec and then figure out what are the things we need to answer from there.
Yeah, and open to changing the reference implementation to match the spec as it evolves.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Let's chat offline then. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Great. the rest of the entrance criteria are like a little bit more ambiguous. They're there on purpose. The real reason for the difference between stage 0 and stage 1 is we want to encourage lots of people to come up with ideas. They all end up at 0. Stage 1 are really the set of ideas that we expect there to actually be like continued work on. So there's a clear champion. We kind of know what space we're working in. So there's a clear explanation of the problem space and beginning of an explanation of the solution space. So I think we have that. You know, we want data streamed back over time, defer and stream, 2 clear explorations into the solution space. Some illustrative examples, incomplete spec edits. I think like the reference implementation change kind of serves that purpose. But really it's like stage 1 means that the working group kind of agrees that this is something that everybody is excited about continued work happening in. If everyone thought like this is a crazy thing to work on, then we'd like advise you to save your energy and it would stay at 0. But I think everybody's pretty pumped up about this. So it makes sense to me to move this to stage 1.
Sounds good.
Stage 1 is where the bulk of the work happens.
Potentially takes years, right?
So, I mean, defer and stream, when did we talk about them? In 2017? So yeah, you're already in the multiple years phase, so.
Yeah, sounds good.
Awesome. I'll make a note to, I'm not sure which thing is the official issue that's tracking this, but wherever it is, I'll bump it up to stage 1.
Okay. Yeah.
Any other help?
I think Liliana's RFC might be a good one.
Okay. Yeah, we should make sure that we find the sort of the canonical issue or PR.
Mm-hmm.
Any other help that you need?
So far, no. I think it's pretty good. Thank you so much. Those feedbacks are really valuable.
Sweet. Super excited to see this continue to progress. We have one last thing on our agenda, and it was from Orta. Is Orta here by chance? I don't see him in the participants list. Okay, Orta's not here. That's okay. We will save that agenda for next time.
Yes,
that is.
Yeah, I
Go
have
ahead.
a little bit context on that. Yeah, I don't know the full length that he wanted to discuss, but one of the things he created a task for student for Summer of Code, and Orta said he only can commentate it. So like if somebody else wants to commentate it with Orta, so the task is about redesigning GraphQL.org. So it's not like particular project. It's like just like get things done. So if somebody like knowledgeable about front end or like content about like this stuff and want to help, like I believe, yeah, you can like add yourself as co-mentor for this thing. Yeah, I think it's one of the issues he wanted to discuss. I think he wanted to discuss more things.
Cool. Hopefully he can make it to one of the next ones and we can go into that with more depth. If it's just about making sure we get Summer of Code tasks panned out, then it seems like we're not time pressed to do that. Maybe we can also take an action to open an issue about this and work on it a little bit offline between meetings. That's the end of our stated agenda. Anything else anybody wants to cover while we're all here?
One thing is kind of arise during discussion about namespaces. Just as an idea, if somebody wants to do it, I think it would be useful to go through rejected things or things that we didn't discuss like a lot and kind of create frequently asked question why we don't have like asterisk in GraphQL queries or other things, because people, it's the most popular issue for them. Like people constantly want asterisk, and there is like multiply. It's like one issue, nobody bothers to read it, and there is a bunch of explanation in different places. So if somebody interested, it's actually like good idea for a blog post. I know like it's not so exciting to write like documents and markdown, but if Andy or somebody else wants to write cool blog post why GraphQL don't have asterisk, it would be great.
It's a good idea. Leave that open for anyone who wants to volunteer. All right, cool. I will. Oh, Benji said that he might help out with that. Sounds great. Thanks, Benji.
One other thing, the GraphQL input union discussion. If anyone has opinions on that, please get involved with that. I think it's been fairly quiet recently. There is discussion at the moment around whether we potentially do want to support scalars in there or not, and whether the output of the whether our output unions and interfaces need to be like basically exactly the same structure as the input ones. So if you're interested in that, please do get involved in those discussions.
Yeah, and actually action item for last discussion, I just remembered, we decided that every proposal should have a champion. And if we don't find like a champion for one of the input union variants, it's kind of like losing the race. So yeah, and I said I will adopt discriminator solution. I need to work on that. I need to work for Photoshop, but I will like try to find time and implement, at least like start some implementation. And I encourage other people to read like RFC and choose if you want to be champion some of the proposals. To do exploratory PRs for GraphQL.js or like for a spec.
Yeah, I was planning on helping with one of those as well. So agreed. Let's make sure we continue to make progress on that. I know we didn't get a chance to dig into it this time, but I expect that we probably will in the next meeting. Okay. With that, I'll wrap up the meeting. Thanks, everybody. Very worthwhile conversations, and looking forward to cutting this next version of the spec and all the work that'll go into the next edition. Thanks, folks.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.